there's something else that was in the drawer. Do you recognize that?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's her Apple Watch.
Her Apple Watch. This is the Apple Watch that apparently the police used to go up the stairs, downstairs, heart rate, things of that nature, right?
Yep.
They never even seized it, did they? They left it in the drawer, right?
Apparently.
So,
We're now 5 weeks into one of the most argued over trials in the country, and the court of public opinion has been putting in overtime right alongside the actual jury, picking apart every exhibit that gets put on a screen. Most of what's circulating doesn't hold up. But one piece keeps pulling me back in, because the more you sit with it, the less it adds up cleanly, and that's Lindsay Clancy's Apple Watch. At 5:23 that afternoon, the watch sent its last heart rate reading to her phone, 57 beats per minute. Nothing after that. No more heartbeats logged, not one, for the rest of that day. And in the minutes that follow, the watch and the phone start disagreeing with each other. The phone keeps registering movement, the watch never picks up at all. Then there's the detail that really doesn't sit right. The following morning, while Lindsay Clancy was unconscious in a hospital bed after jumping from a second-story window, a device tied to her still logged new movement. And on top of all of that, this watch, now one of the most dissected exhibits of the entire trial, wasn't even collected by police. It was found later, in a bedside drawer, by Lindsay's own defense attorney and her husband. Every one of those facts is true. None of them explain themselves yet, and that's exactly the gap we're closing today. Cases like this are why this channel exists, to keep pulling at the thread until it makes sense. This is the fatal truth, and subscribing means you're staying on this investigation with us. Quick flashback for anyone catching this one for the first time. On January 24th, 2023, while her husband Patrick was out running errands, Lindsay Clancy, a 36-year-old former labor and delivery nurse, brought her 3 children into the basement of their Duxbury, Massachusetts home and strangled them with exercise resistance bands. 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. She then went upstairs, cut her wrists and throat, took a mixture of crushed medications, and jumped from a second-story window, a fall that left her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. She has never once disputed that she did this. Her defense is built entirely around why, a postpartum psychotic break, worsened by heavy psychiatric medication and a healthcare system she says failed to catch it in time, and her plea is not guilty by reason of lack of criminal responsibility. The Commonwealth says she knew exactly what she was doing. That disagreement is the entire trial. Now back to the watch. Let's rebuild the last hour the watch actually recorded, because the sequence matters more than any single number in it. The 5:23 p.m. heart rate of 57 is genuinely on the low end for her that day. Her average ran in the high 80s to low 90s, spiking past 120 at points. And a resting number like that, right as 3 children were allegedly being strangled one after another, is the detail that launched 1,000 theories on its own. But a digital forensics expert who spent hours on the stand walking through the raw data offered a much less cinematic explanation. An Apple Watch stops sending a heart rate to the phone for exactly 3 reasons. It gets taken off, it gets switched off, or the battery dies. Any one of those, on its own, accounts for total silence from that point forward. The phone, though, kept going a little longer. At 5:33 p.m., it logged what the software calls a flight climb, a change in elevation big enough to register as a set of stairs, detected by the barometer built into the device. A second one logged 5 minutes later, at 5:38 p.m. In between those 2 data points sit 2 phone calls, one incoming call from Patrick that went unanswered, and one outgoing call placed back to him. Then, at 5:38 p.m., the phone stopped logging anything at all. No steps, no distance, no further flights, and stayed silent until the next morning. Under cross-examination, the same expert had to admit he had no way of knowing what happened during that blackout. The phone could have simply been set down while its owner kept moving through the house, and the data would look identical either way. That admission is the entire reason this became a rabbit hole. Because here's what happened next. At around 7 to 8 a.m. the following day, January 25th, the health data tied to Lindsay's account picked back up, roughly 47 meters of new distance traveled. At that hour, Lindsay Clancy was in a hospital bed, unconscious, recovering from emergency surgery after her fall. She was not wearing that watch. So whose steps were those? The answer turned out to be far less mysterious than the question sounded, and it's worth slowing down for because it's the moment this piece of evidence stopped being supernatural and started being procedural. Under further questioning, the expert clarified that the January 25th movement wasn't coming from the watch at all. It was pulled from the iPhone. A phone that's powered on and sitting in an evidence bag will keep quietly counting steps and distance as it gets carried out of a house, driven to a station, and logged into storage, with absolutely no person attached to that number. It's not evidence of anything happening to Lindsay. It's a phone doing what phones do while it changes hands. But solving that half of the mystery only sharpens the other half. If the watch had already gone silent by 5:23 the evening before, where physically was it? That's when the story got uncomfortable. The watch, jurors learned, had never been collected during the original search of the house at all. It surfaced weeks later, sitting inside a nightstand drawer in the master bedroom, alongside a cluster of emptied prescription bottles. Trazodone from January 5th, lamotrigine from mid-December, Klonopin from just a day before the killings. And it wasn't a state trooper or a crime scene tech who found it. It was Lindsay's own defense attorney, together with Patrick, going through that drawer well after the initial investigation had wrapped. When the lead investigator was asked point blank why that drawer was never searched, all he could offer was that he personally hadn't searched it. He couldn't say whether anyone else had, or why it got skipped. That's not the only thing that came out of that drawer story either. Patrick had already turned over a separate set of pill bottles to state police early on, ones he said he'd found in the center console of his truck, handed over directly, no detour. But the bottles from the nightstand went a different route entirely. Patrick gave those to his own attorney first, not to investigators, and on the stand, he couldn't explain why he treated one set of evidence differently from the other. He never personally handed those bottles, or the watch sitting next to them, over to state police at all. So sit with that for a second. A piece of evidence central enough to warrant an entire day of expert testimony, sourced not from a police evidence log, but from a drawer the lead investigator admits nobody can confirm was ever checked. Sloppy oversight or something else? Tell us your one-word verdict in the comments, because that exact question is what set the internet on fire, and not in the measured way we've been walking through it. Once that detail went public, it stopped being a courtroom footnote and became the seed of a much bigger theory circulating online, that Patrick Clancy himself was somehow involved, and that this untouched drawer wasn't an oversight, but a favor. It's worth being precise about what that theory does and doesn't have behind it. Nothing about it has ever been raised inside the courtroom by either side. Patrick has never been charged and has been publicly cleared by investigators. And it runs straight into the one fact nobody disputes. Lindsay has never once claimed someone else did this. Legal commentators who followed the case closely have made the same point. If Lindsay's own defense team believed there was a real path to pointing at Patrick, that's a far stronger argument than an insanity defense, and they never touched it. That didn't stop people from building on it. A viewer sent in a detailed breakdown comparing surveillance footage of Patrick at the CVS to footage of him later at the 3V restaurant that same night. A different looking jacket, a change in shoe soles, hair that looked straight in one clip and wavier in the other, and floated the idea that a second person, a friend standing in for him, made one of those stops while Patrick was somewhere else entirely. That theory leaned on a real inconsistency in his own testimony. Patrick said the drive to CVS takes 3 minutes, and that he left around the time Lindsay texted him at 5:15 p.m., which should have put him inside the store by roughly 5:18 to 5:20. Surveillance instead shows him walking in at 5:32. He'd also sent a work email, time-stamped 5:24 p.m., that he first attributed to his desktop at home, before backtracking under cross-examination and admitting it might have come from his phone, meaning it could have been sent from inside his car, somewhere between leaving the house and walking into that store. And the clock matters here, for a colder reason than wardrobe. Patrick's 911 call is logged at 6:11 p.m. He's on camera leaving the restaurant at 5:54 p.m. Medical examiners placed the children's deaths somewhere between 5:15 and 6 p.m., and testified that strangulation alone typically takes 6 to 8 minutes per victim, which, across 3 children, is closer to 20 minutes of continuous physical struggle. If you're trying to build a timeline where Patrick did this instead of Lindsay, you're trying to fit that into whatever window he wasn't on camera, and it's tight. Neither the prosecution nor the defense has ever disputed that it's Patrick on that footage. The clothing discrepancies remain unexplained on the record, but nobody with access to the full timeline considered them worth fighting over, which tends to be the difference between a detail that looks damning in a 10-second clip and one that means very little once you have everything else in front of you. What we do have on the record is Patrick's own arrival home. A responding officer testified to finding him standing over Lindsay in the yard, cell phone still in his hand at his side, before he turned and walked past the officer toward the house without a word. Officers followed the screaming down into the basement, where Patrick was already in the room with the children. The moment he saw them, he turned, headed for the door, and screamed that she had killed the kids. None of that has ever been disputed either. It's simply the account of the man who found his own children. A second theory grew out of a real estate transaction. The Duxbury house was eventually sold, and the buyer turned out to have once worked as an assistant district attorney for Plymouth County, the same office now prosecuting Lindsay. Online, that overlap turned into a theory of quiet collusion between the new homeowner and the prosecution. The timeline mostly dismantles it on its own. His time at that office ended roughly 5 years before the killings, years before Lindsay and Patrick were even married. Property records show he bought the home in January 2024 for $675,000. A number of attorneys following the case have called a steep discount for that part of the South Shore. Exactly what you'd expect for a house where a triple homicide occurred, not evidence of a favor. The purchase only became public because prosecutors later asked for a jury view, a formal visit, so jurors could see the home's layout in person, including the distance from the basement to the bedroom and the height of the window Lindsay jumped from. The homeowner's attorney fought it hard in a pretrial hearing, citing the disruption to his client's household and his partner who works from home. A prosecutor pushed back just as hard, pointing out the irony of a former assistant district attorney objecting to a courtroom procedure he'd have relied on constantly in his own career, and arguing that buying a home with this history means accepting this kind of scrutiny might follow. The judge sided with the prosecution, and the jury view was carried out on July 31st. A third theory turns the lens back on Lindsay herself, suggesting she manufactured her psychiatric symptoms from the start, faked the hallucinations, staged the search history, even shaped her own journal entries to build an insanity defense before she ever needed one. Multiple Commonwealth witnesses, clinicians who evaluated her in the days around the killings, testified they saw no outward signs of active psychosis in their sessions with her. Her thinking was linear, goal-directed, and she wasn't visibly reacting to anything that wasn't there. Prosecutors also pointed to a pattern of searches on her phone in the weeks beforehand, repeated queries about psychosis, bipolar symptoms, diabetic ketoacidosis without high blood sugar, and the specific medications she'd been prescribed, arguing it looked like research for a defense rather than symptoms of one. And in the immediate aftermath, while critically injured, she was lucid enough to write a note asking hospital staff whether she had an attorney and to formally request her medical proxy be switched from Patrick to her own parents. Set against that is a mountain of testimony that cuts hard the other way, and a lot of it starts with what was actually going into her body in the 4 months before January 24th. At one point, defense attorney Kevin Reddington rolled out a poster board in front of the jury, listing more than a dozen separate psychiatric medications prescribed to Lindsay in that window, a stack that included Prozac, Klonopin, Ativan, Seroquel, Remeron, and Ambien, among others, layered on top of and swapped between each other in rapid succession. Her own psychiatric nurse practitioner, Rebecca Gelada, took the stand and described the toll that combination took on her, a severe mental haze she and Lindsay both referred to as brain fog.
So let's talk about brain fog. Did you ask her what that meant? Because when you say subjective, that means that's her interpretation. That's in her head. She's telling you, right?
Yes.
As opposed to objective, which would be what people in general would think, right?
Yes.
So when she's telling you, In addition to the anxiety, in addition to the crying, in addition to the stress that she was undergoing, she was worrying about suicide. She talked about brain fog. So you must have asked her, what does that mean? Subjectively, what does that mean?
Subjectively means in the patient's, own opinion. That's what their experience is.
Okay, so she's the one that's inside her head, right?
Yes.
So what were the symptoms? What is it? When a patient tells you that they have brain fog, is that something you would consider as being a potential side effect of the medications that you would put her on?
It depends.
On what?
I mean, sometimes it could be, and sometimes it could be unrelated. It's a symptom of depression as well. So sometimes it's hard to tell what it's attributed to.
Along with intrusive thoughts and side effects that Gelada testified she witnessed firsthand. That board is really the backbone of everything the defense is arguing. Not just that Lindsay had postpartum psychosis in the abstract, but that a rotating cocktail of a dozen-plus psychiatric drugs, mismanaged over 16 weeks, is what tipped her into it. A version of involuntary, medication-induced psychosis, rather than a naturally occurring one. The hallucinations themselves didn't only come from Lindsay's own account, either, which matters because it's the piece that undercuts the theory that she invented all of this, after the fact, to build a legal defense. A hospital chaplain, Sheila Kavanaugh, testified that she sat with Lindsay at Brigham and Women's Hospital in the hours immediately after she was brought in from the fall, before any attorney was involved, before any defense strategy existed. Kavanaugh described Lindsay's affect that day as completely flat and testified that Lindsay repeatedly recounted the same detail to her unprompted, a male voice that had told her if she didn't obey it, neither she nor her children would be safe.
Perhaps a day or two.
A day or two, okay. Tell the jurors what she said to you.
She continued to look like the photograph you just saw. She was covered, tubes everywhere, the neck brace. Her emotional state was very neutral, a flat affect. But I remember vividly the first thing she said to me. Now, she had heard me for a couple of days. We had been praying together. And so when I went in on Tuesday the 31st, she said to me as I held her hand to comfort her, "I am so glad my children are safe."
Was there any other conversation that you had with her?
I replied theologically to Lindsay, and I said, "Lindsay, your children are safe. They're safe in heaven with God." And I held her hand throughout that conversation, and we prayed for them.
Did she make any other statements to you?
She did. She alluded to having heard a voice, and the voice, according to Lindsay, told her that if she did not follow the command, neither she nor her children would be safe.
And did she indicate whether it was a male voice, a female voice, loud, soft?
She alluded to the fact that it was a male voice and it was persistent.
Because Kavanaugh had no connection to the family, no stake in the outcome, and was speaking to Lindsay before any legal proceedings had begun, her testimony functions as independent corroboration that the command hallucinations were present from the very start, not something assembled later once Lindsay understood she'd need a defense. That still leaves the hardest question for jurors to reconcile. If she genuinely believed she was hearing commands from something outside herself, how does that square with the physical reality of what was actually done to 3 children in that basement? Coordinated, sustained, one after another. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Philip Resnick, testifying for the defense remotely after a video connection issue delayed proceedings, addressed that directly, describing what he called a delusion of influence, a state in which Lindsay didn't just hear a voice, but felt as though an outside force had taken direct control of her own body. Resnick told the jury it was almost as if she'd become a puppet, with something else pulling the strings, her hands carrying out actions while the part of her that would normally recognize right from wrong was, in his assessment, disconnected from what those hands were doing. His name alone carries weight in a room like this one. He's the same psychiatrist whose testimony helped secure a successful insanity finding for Andrea Yates, the Texas mother who drowned her 5 children in 2001, and after an initial conviction, was retried and found not guilty by reason of insanity, and who remains in a state mental hospital to this day. Whether that precedent sways this jury is unclear, but it's the piece of testimony that tries to answer the exact question the Commonwealth keeps circling back to. Not whether she did it, but how a mind in genuine psychosis could still physically execute something this deliberate-looking from the outside. He also testified that psychotic symptoms don't run continuously. He compared them to waves at a beach, present 1 hour and gone the next, meaning a single clinical snapshot can easily miss an active break entirely. He also testified that someone in the middle of psychosis is still fully capable of making a phone call, driving a car, or holding an ordinary conversation, none of which rules out what's happening underneath. Patrick himself, called as a Commonwealth witness, testified that Lindsay had described intrusive thoughts of harming the children to him personally in the weeks before it happened, along with escalating, disproportionate fears over the kids' health. And her own journal and notes app entries, read into the record, described her as overwhelmed to the point of telling Patrick she wanted to die, obsessively monitoring her infant's sleep schedule and feeling disconnected from and resentful toward her older children in ways she recognized as unfair even as she wrote them down. Maybe the single most striking testimony came from a witness with every reason to want Lindsay convicted rather than defend her. Patrick's own mother, her former mother-in-law. She testified that in the months before the killings, Lindsay had voluntarily committed herself out of fear of hurting herself and had voiced concern about hurting her children, and that she'd effectively been asking for help that never fully arrived. There's also a financial thread worth naming honestly, because the prosecution has raised it. Patrick has filed a civil lawsuit against the hospitals and doctors who treated Lindsay, alleging medical mismanagement contributed to what happened, and a lack of criminal responsibility verdict would remove any incentive those institutions have to let that case go to trial rather than settle quietly. It's a real conflict of interest to weigh. It just doesn't cancel out a mother-in-law's testimony, a chaplain's testimony, and a nurse practitioner's testimony, none of whom have that same incentive, all describing the same unraveling. So here's the actual question, underneath all three of these theories, and it's not whodunit. Lindsay has never disputed that. Was she in the grip of a psychiatric break severe enough that she didn't understand what she was doing, or was she lucid enough, in the Commonwealth's eyes, to be held criminally responsible for it? Tell us where you land now that you've got the fuller picture, because that distinction is the entire verdict this jury has to reach. I want to bring in some outside perspective here, because the legal mechanics of this case trip up a lot of people who are used to more straightforward true crime cases. Attorneys who've spent time in Massachusetts courtrooms point out that this isn't a whodunit at all. It's one of the only true crime cases in recent memory where the defendant has never denied the act, only the legal responsibility for it. That flips the usual burden. The Commonwealth doesn't just have to prove Lindsay did it, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she didn't have a mental disease or defect severe enough to meet the legal bar for lacking criminal responsibility, a considerably heavier lift than a standard murder case. It's also worth understanding what jurors in this case have actually been exposed to. The judge barred the 911 call and autopsy photographs from public broadcast specifically to protect the Clancy family, but jurors themselves still had to see and hear all of it in the courtroom. Courtroom observers have described visible tears throughout the jury box during that testimony. There's a growing recognition among legal professionals that this kind of case takes a real psychological toll on the people asked to sit through it, which is part of why more states have started offering jurors counseling once a trial like this ends. And their questionnaire going into the trial specifically asked about their own experience with mental health issues, in themselves or close family, because how a juror personally relates to postpartum psychosis and psychiatric breakdowns is likely to shape how they weigh everything else they hear. The jury itself has been sequestered from all of this online noise by design. No social media, no local news coverage, and an instruction to disclose it immediately if a family member brings up anything they've seen from the outside. Which means everything we've just walked through, the doppelganger theory, the DA homeowner theory, the faked psychosis theory, exists entirely outside the room where the actual decision gets made. Attorneys who've watched cases like this play out before point to a pattern. High-profile trials reliably generate exactly this kind of theorizing online, because a tidy villain and a solvable mystery generate far more engagement than the harder, sadder truth that these cases usually turn out to be exactly what they look like on the surface. That doesn't make the online conversation worthless. Some of it, like the unsearched drawer, points at a real institutional gap worth asking about. But it does mean most of what's driving the clicks isn't what's driving the verdict. This isn't a Massachusetts-only story anymore either. A case like this, a mother, a mental health system, a piece of consumer tech turned courtroom evidence, has pulled in trial watchers well outside the state and even outside the country, which says something about how far digital evidence and postpartum mental health have both become subjects people feel personally invested in. As of this recording, both sides have rested and the Commonwealth's rebuttal case has run its course. One of the prosecution's final witnesses, forensic psychologist Dr. Kirk Heilbrunn, offered a notably different read on Lindsay's motive than the defense has argued. Rather than framing the killings as a product of command hallucinations, Heilbrunn testified that Lindsay may have committed what he called altruistic filicide, a term for a parent killing a child out of a distorted belief that it spares the child from suffering, not because psychosis erased her judgment, but because she genuinely believed it was the kinder outcome. He went further, testifying that Lindsay, raised Catholic, may have believed she and the children would be reunited together in heaven if she killed them and then herself, immediately caveating that this isn't actually how Catholic teaching frames it. That religious framing is exactly what triggered the case's latest flashpoint. The defense moved for a mistrial, arguing prosecutors had improperly introduced the concept of mortal sin through that testimony. The judge denied the motion, but called the testimony problematic and told jurors to disregard it. Heilbrunn's credibility also took a hit under cross-examination, where he acknowledged he was being paid more than $50,000 by prosecutors to testify, and that the last time he'd personally treated a patient with postpartum psychosis was back in 1982, a detail the defense will almost certainly lean on in closing. Closing arguments are now expected Thursday, with the case handed to the jury shortly after. If the jury convicts on first-degree murder, Lindsay Clancy faces life without parole. If they find her not criminally responsible, she'll be committed to a state mental health facility rather than prison. Massachusetts law also leaves the jury a middle option, a lesser-included charge of second-degree murder, which still carries a life sentence, but with the possibility of parole. We'll have the verdict the moment it comes down. Pull back from the flight climb timestamps and the drawer nobody searched. And this case is really testing something bigger than one contested piece of hardware. It's testing how much weight a courtroom, and millions of people watching from outside it, is willing to put on a consumer fitness gadget that was never built to survive this kind of scrutiny. An Apple Watch counts steps and reminds you to stand. It wasn't designed to be cross-examined, and yet here, its silence carried as much weight as sworn testimony, filling gaps the people in that house either couldn't or wouldn't fill in themselves. That's not unique to this case, and it won't be the last time it happens. As more of what we do gets logged automatically, in the background, without us ever thinking about it, courtrooms are going to keep dragging these devices into the light to answer questions they were never built to answer. And juries are going to keep being asked how much to trust a machine that only ever tells part of the story.